Yeah, wow.
Behave my class. You got everyone? Is that everyone?
Yes.
Yeah? Cool. Okay, so nutrition. Obviously I've already mentioned that that is sort of my area of expertise. That is where I specialise. In the last 18 months I've converted that to performance nutrition and more specifically HYROX nutrition. So as I'm sure you all know, nutrition is very nuanced. So everybody in here is going to have different needs. You've all got different goals when it comes to nutrition. I know this is a HYROX specific talk, but even within that, you're all going to have different goals. You're all going to be running different amounts of times in the race, doubles races versus solo races. We can break it down into specific goals. Are you in a body composition phase? Lou was speaking earlier about programming and periodisation. We have to match nutrition to that. So, for example, if we're in a performance phase, we're peaking for a competition, but we're eating a deficit because we also want to lose weight, we're probably not optimising for performance at the same time. So it's tweaking nutrition and leaning into those nuances. So what I didn't want to do today is come here and throw a load of numbers at you, because it's quite easy to do that, and that's where nutrition can get a little bit boring. So I didn't want to do that, and I want to just sort of lean into each of you guys. We've got a small group here, so it would be nice for me to sort of understand what you're all sort of currently doing with your nutrition, and then how we can sort of apply that to HYROX. So if you see me looking at my phone, it's because I've got a few notes. So what I want to establish first is the approach that you all sort of take with your nutrition. So who here is rigid with the numbers and likes to track their calories, their macros? Does anyone tend to do that? You've got a nice bit there, 4 and 4, cool. In which way do you four like to do that? Just out of curiosity, is it something that you do every day? Do you weigh your food out? Yes?
Pretty much.
Yeah, cool. And for you guys that don't, what approach are you taking? Is it just a bit more intuitive, or?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
just
right. Protein I want to have, but I don't, not.
I learned after tracking my food for like a month, 6 weeks. You then learn what it is, so you know.
That's exactly where I was, going to go next. You hit the nail on the head, because again, it comes down to personal preference. Everyone's going to have different preferences. Some people like to track the numbers, and I'll go through phases. Sometimes I really like to dial things in, and other times I like to be a bit more intuitive with it. So, especially for things like a body composition phase, where we're actually actively trying to lose weight or gain weight. Often for HYROX, we want to strip as much fat mass as possible, because that just makes us more efficient as athletes. So in those sorts of phases, it becomes important to dial in the numbers a little bit more. But as you say, we can do that in across 3 days or 7 days or maybe 14 days. Dial in the numbers, and then that gives us the information to that's what 100 grams of X looks like. That's what 50 grams of Y looks like. So it's sort of combining both approaches. And what I'm going to speak about today is how nutrition sort of works in terms of a pyramid. And at the base of our pyramid is ultimately calories. That's why I've sort of started the conversation here with, energy intake. So it's about combining those different approaches potentially at times. So again, it's personal preference. For some people, it's tracking religiously, weighing every gram of food. That works for them. But for others, it's a bit more intuitive. And I like to, personally, I was just speaking to Julian about it just then, combining both approaches, especially for a sport or a competition like HYROX, where performance is ultimately our goal. We want to improve. We want to get fitter. Sometimes, if we're too objective with things, we ignore things like our hunger cues and these little bits and pieces. And sometimes, if we're too intuitive with it, it's easy, as you were saying, Leon, just to eat loads of peanuts, not really thinking about what we're doing. Nuts are obviously more calorific, so that can all that. So it's combining both approaches. For me, that's what works best. For my clients, that's what I've noticed works best. So how does everyone sort of feel on combining both approaches? I know you've already mentioned that some of you prefer one or the other, but in terms of combining both approaches,
I tend to have 2 treat days a week.
Yeah, that can work again.
I tend to eat whatever I want.
Yeah.
But normally they'll be like, if I go out for a meal with someone, then I'll have I might have a beer or something. But that'll be my treat day. But
Yeah.
do log it, 'cause otherwise 2 treat days can end up being 4.
Yeah, and it's just you know, it's just using your intuition a little bit with nutrition as well. Like, again, it's so easy to get caught up in the numbers if we are tracking things, and that's when you can develop these slightly unhealthy relationships with food. So combining both can be really, really helpful. Again, I'm just going to check in my phone and make sure I've covered everything there. Another way that we can keep on top of things, it's just something that I have used personally from an anecdotal perspective. Clients have used, works quite well. If you don't want to weigh out every gram of food, but you want to keep on top of numbers, especially if you're in a body composition phase, it's just weighing yourself every so often. So, you know, thinking about, okay, how much food did I eat the next day? How much training did I do? And then, you know, how's that impacting the weight that we're seeing on the scale? So that means, you know, you can just eat slightly less the next day or whatever. It's just, again, taking that more intuitive approach. Next phase on the pyramid, up from our calorie intake, our energy intake, is carbohydrates. Now, HYROX is obviously, as you know, seen today, a very intense sport. It demands carbohydrate intake. So yeah, the next sort of ring on our pyramid is of course calories. And the way I like to, carbohydrates, sorry. The way I like to think about this is glycogen is our stored glucose. So that's ultimately what's going to fuel our performance at those higher intensities. HYROX is an aerobic endurance sport with anaerobic components. Now Luke was talking about this earlier. It's really about lactate management over, you know, the hour, 2 hours. So with the anaerobic components, we're going to be drawing from our glycogen, which is our stored glucose. Okay, is that making sense so far? I want to make sure you're all, you know, you're following and you're all with me. We've mentioned about calories. Who tracks their carbohydrate intake as well? Do you do all of that, or?
I track it. I mean, I keep an eye. I mean,
Yeah.
I've blown it today. I've totally blown it. But yeah, I just keep it low.
Just an eye on it.
Generally, because I'm not
Try
like a
and strip.
HYROX training person.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'll keep down to 100 a day.
Okay. What carbohydrate intake? See, for me, especially, again, this is where it gets nuanced, and I don't want to come in here with sort of blanket statements because you're all going to be different. But my recommendation is you want to be in roughly, again, I said I won't get into the numbers too much, but 3 to 4 grams per kilogram of your body weight in carbohydrates. Now, I see the boys have very nicely put about 45% of your total calories per day out there. I tend to recommend 40 to 50%. Now, if that's, if you're training slightly less per week, you're putting in sort of 5-6 hours, it might be slightly lower on that spectrum. But if you're pushing, you know, to 10-hour training weeks, or you know you've got a competition that week, that's when you might increase it closer to that 50% of your total caloric intake. Okay, does that make sense? Cool.
Yeah, I definitely change it depending on what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think that's, again, that intuitive approach, which is something that I really, you know, try to encourage and emphasise. And what sort of carb sources are we turning to? So we'll just go through the group. You know, what sort of carbs are we eating here?
I might have a sweet potato.
Sweet potato.
Or a bit of sourdough toast.
Yeah. Okay.
I try to keep away from no ultra processed foods.
No. Yeah.
But anything that's just a more natural way
Yep.
of getting some carbs in.
Cool. Anything different to that, or same sort of line?
Vegetable.
Big rice man,
Rice man,
There's
rice. White rice, brown rice, quinoa.
I do
Quinoa.
quite like
Quinoa, couscous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like couscous is good. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Giant. I'm a big fan of giant.
Yeah.
Not a fan.
I'm a fan.
Yeah. Is there a reason for it? I mean, technically yes, but again, what I'm going to
Depending on the day, so if I'm racing on a high box the day after, then I need to go. But then I've been quite conscious about how much I would have.
for you, I would think about rather than afterwards, before.
No, before.
Oh, before. Okay, cool.
Like before I'm carb loading.
Yeah. The reason I asked that question in terms of sources is because this is the sort of things that we need to start thinking about when it comes to race day and intense training sessions especially. So things like sweet potatoes, things like brown rice, quinoa, they're a lot more fibrous. There are starchy carbs, our grains, our potatoes, beans as well, obviously good source of protein as well, but yeah, a good source of carbs too. They're more fibrous. So slightly further out from our training sessions, talking sort of 3-4 hours before, that's when we want those more complex carbohydrates because they're slightly slower burning. But as we approach race start, that's when we might turn to our white rices with honey, Bananas can be slightly fibrous, but they're nice and quick digesting. So thinking about what carb sources we're eating at different times is something that I want you all to start thinking about as well. Okay, cool. In terms of when you should be eating your carbohydrates, is this something that we think about as well?
Yeah, I really want to know about that.
Yeah. Okay. Ask me a question about that then. In terms of timings.
I don't do any sort of HYROXy thing, but I do some training sessions that have some similar stuff in it, and I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's called Core Club, and it's over in Ipswich, and it's like an hour, and they call it Breathless.
Okay.
And it's got the rower, and it's got the, and I play around with different things because I don't know what should I eat before.
Yeah.
I do that because it is, you have to rinse yourself in this session. You go for it, and I never know what should I have, what will give me that best fuel, so I don't fizzle out for that hour.
How long do those sessions last? This is all really good stuff because it applies to everyone. So how long does that last?
It's 50 minutes to an hour.
Is there a point in that session when you feel like you start to wane or fall off? Or
Always really sort of like, I always blow up at the beginning because I feel like yes, I'm superwoman, and then I fizzle out sort of 3/4.
Okay. So you said there that lasts about an hour. That's not too far off from our HYROX. HYROX might be hour and a half, 2 hours.
That's why I thought
in that sort of range. So it applies very well. So a couple of frameworks that I like to think about is, we'll start from, let's use a bit of a case study example. We've got our race day starting at 10 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, your race might be in the afternoon, it might be in the evening, so that's where things start to differ. But we'll go right back to the day before. Now, people talk about with HYROX, you need to carb load, you need to eat loads of carbohydrates, and people fall into the trap of going down the route of eating, pizzas and chips and burgers, because it's like an excuse to eat as many carbs as possible, and they get excited. We want to avoid that. That's pretty obvious. And they'll also say, start carb loading 2-3 days before. That's not necessary for a HYROX because it's not like a marathon, for example, where you're out there for 3 to 4 hours. So what I say is, start thinking about increasing your carbohydrate intake the day before these intense sessions or the race itself. So, for example, the night before, I might just be eating a slightly higher carbohydrate meal. I've already mentioned that 3 to 4 grams per kilogram of your body weight per day, if you're training for a HYROX, is a good thing to sort of strive for. You might push that to 6 or 8. I've seen some coaches out there, and this is where, again, it's a frustration for me. I'm sure they probably say the same about what I'm saying, but I see coaches say eat 10 grams per kilogram of your body weight in carbohydrate. That's just too much. If I'm a 75 kilogram athlete, that's 750 grams of carbs. That's, we're talking 3,000 calories just from carbs. You're going to feel bloated, you've got a race at 10 in the morning. These are the little things that you need to start thinking about. And in the morning of your race, if I'm racing at 10, you don't really want to be waking up at 6. You might do, because ideally you want to be eating 3 to 4 hours before. In that meal, you might still prioritise your carbs, but you can afford a little bit more fibre. So again, complex carbs around that sort of time. But what's really important to think about, we've already mentioned it, is as you approach that race start or as you approach that training session, switching your carbs to those more simple carbs. So for yourself in this session, you might turn to white rice with honey. That's a good one. Dates are a really good one. Dried fruit, dried mango, bananas, rice cakes, or if you train your gut, which is something that I'll touch on in just a moment, energy gels, energy drinks, isotonics, those sorts of things. Okay? Is everything clear with what I've touched on so far? One thing I want to just mention and make sure is clear, and it's something that's not talked about a lot, is there's another sort of framework and rule that I like to get people to think about is, it's a little bit easy to remember, it's 2 to 4 hours before you race, you want 2 to 4 grams per kilogram of your body weight in carbs. You want to load that to the 4 hour mark as much as you can. So again, I've mentioned you want that main sort of meal, carbohydrate heavy, as close to that 2 to 4 gram mark as possible. As you approach your intense training session or as you approach your race start, that's when you want to start switching to liquid carbs, isotonics, simpler digesting carbs. The reason being, A, it just reduces the gastric load, but B, if we're eating too many carbs close to race start, you actually get this effect which is called hypoglycemia. So you're taking on so many carbs, the body reacts in a way, the pancreas goes, oh my god, what's going on, let's release loads of insulin, taking all that glucose, and all of a sudden you've got no blood glucose because the the muscles just soaked it all up. So loading that to 4 hours before, and then switching to liquid carbs and reducing your intake as you approach race start. Does that make sense? I appreciate I'm spouting information, so if you've got any questions, please just let me know.
So
Is
those
there-
gels don't give you a spike then? Because I would be worried then that I'd get a spike and then I'd still fizzle out because I was getting a spike.
They do, but you're actively utilising that carbohydrate. So you're always pulling. So if you've topped off your glycogen stores before you race, which again is your stored glucose, you'll have about 100 grams in your liver and about 500 grams in your muscles. So you can utilise that during intense exercise. What taking carbs on during the race, so whether that's a gel or a chew or an isotonic drink, prevents the muscles using that glycogen because you've sort of taken some exogenously, so from an external source. So it just prevents using up all of your glycogen at once. So that's why it's advised to take on carbs during a race or certainly just before, but again not too much. Have we got any questions on carbohydrates before we sort of move on? If there is, just fire them at me. But that's carbohydrates done, so we've got our calories at the base of the pyramid. We've then got our carbohydrates, next is protein. Again, it's a very hot topic. People love to talk about protein and prioritising protein. Very important, especially for a sport like HYROX, where there is a lot of load on the body. There are the strength elements, as the boys were talking about. There are the endurance elements. It can break your body down a lot. So again, we can get into the numbers and in the weeds a lot, but what I tend to recommend is if you're eating 2 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, you're doing a good job. You're covering all bases in terms of recovery. If you're in a sort of more of a gaining phase, you want to gain muscle, you might push that a little bit more, but 2 grams tends to be a good goal to strive for. Now, again, I could get into the weeds on protein. I could be here and talking to you all day, but have we got any sort of questions on protein? Has anyone taken an approach to protein that they'd like to bring up or mention, or are you happy just with that number in your head, 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, and you can sort of roll with that?
Can you have too much protein?
You can certainly. I mean, you can't necessarily have too much protein because previously there's been studies where they've said you can't absorb more than 40 grams per mil, or way back in the day like 100 grams per day and these sorts of numbers. But what's been sort of established is that 40 grams per mil is what's used for muscle protein synthesis, so to grow muscles, repair muscles, but anything extra just gets utilised for other things in the body, so it's not like it's wasted. Where you can have too much protein is it starts, as these numbers suggest here, it starts eating into your total caloric intake. So if we're aiming for 40 to 50% in carbs, we're aiming for roughly 25% in protein. These numbers are spot on, boys, loving it. If all of a sudden we're eating too much protein and that protein number is dipping into 30-35%, that's eating into our carbohydrate intake. All of a sudden we're flagging in sessions because we've not got the fuel. Okay? We're recovering nicely, but we're not got the energy to fuel the sessions. And carbohydrates, just to touch on it, just a little nugget of information, also help pull in the protein, so they work sort of synergistically for recovery. So we don't want to sacrifice our carb intake for our protein intake. That's why it's higher up on that sort of pyramid that I talk about. Okay. Is that all clear?
Two protein questions then. One is, what is your view on the ratio of fat, protein, and should you always eat fat when you eat protein?
Yeah. So, in fact, I'll just touch on that now. So the next rung on the pyramid and the ladder is fats.
Oh, right.
So people will, in endurance sports especially, have fat as an afterthought, but I encourage people to be a bit more intentional with their fat intake. Now previously, you're touching there on protein and fat, and like things like red meats or chicken thighs that are slightly higher in fat content. Go for as lean sources as possible. And yes, I get that, and previously saturated fats have been demonised. When it comes to fats, I'm thinking about, yes, we want our anti-inflammatory fats, our omegas, things like fish and olive oils and avocados, but a little bit of saturated fat isn't going to hurt. Where it becomes a problem, again, is if we're eating really fatty cuts of meat and loads of olive oil and avocado, and all of a sudden the calories are creeping up because fats are more calorific than carbs and protein, and it's just eating into those percentages that we've got on the board there. That's again where it becomes a problem, similar to protein. So prioritising our carb intake, then protein. being intentional with our fats because they play such an important role for our hormonal health, which can lower stress and these sorts of things. But not to the point where it's sacrificing those other macros. Does that sort of answer the question? I know I went around the houses a little bit there, but yeah. And did you have another?
I think I eat too much fat.
Do you know roughly how much?
No, I don't do any measuring.
No, okay. What might be good for you is to get, as we mentioned at the start, get a bit intentional with it and look at, okay, let me track for 3 days or 7 days, see how much fat I'm actually eating.
Yeah.
How does that sit on the percentages of my total caloric intake? And then that, gives you the know-how, as you were saying, of, okay, this is how much I am eating each day, and I can strip that back. Now I know what that looks like. It just gives you the information. So calorie counting and macro tracking is a tool that we can use for that.
I mean, outside of using food as like talking about it as fuel for working out and all the rest of it, I just do definitely find that if I eat protein and fats combined, I definitely feel fuller. I can just go from, I feel great when I do eat like that. I know we're all different, aren't we? And maybe, other people wouldn't feel the same, but I do.
Everyone's different. I really encourage experimentation. So anyone that does sort of work with me, I always caveat anything that I do with the first plan, be it a nutrition plan, a meal plan, it's never going to be perfect. You're going to try it, there's things you're not going to like, but it's about experimentation and finding what works for you. You might find that, okay, these are the recommended numbers, but actually, not only do you feel better, you perform better on slightly higher fats, maybe it's 35%. It's about making those tweaks, and that's why, again, I don't like coming in with blanket rules and blanket statements for nutrition because everybody is ultimately different. Okay, is everything, again, I'm going to keep asking, is everything clear so far?
Yeah,
got
great.
any questions? All good? Go for
Just
it.
on protein, do you need to be worried about like the quality of protein from the sources you're having? Because like I'm veggie, so do I need to be worried about getting it from like non-meat sources, or is it just protein and that's it?
Ultimately, protein is protein, ultimately at a high level, but again, the next rung leads quite nicely. The next rung on the pyramid is micronutrients, and obviously a profile or 100 grams of lean red meat is going to be different to 100 grams of, be it tofu, be it whatever source that you opt for, because of the micronutrient content and the amino acid profiles. So for someone who is veggie or vegan, if they're trying to get their protein from whatever it may be, sometimes combining different sources, I'm sure you've heard that before, helps hit certain amino acid profiles and micronutrients, your B12s, which tend to lack in a vegan or a vegetarian diet. Some other examples off the top of my head, like creatine content, carnitine, which tend to be in meats and not plant-based proteins. Does that sort of answer your question?
And then what helped me is introducing creatine. Right?
Supplementation.
And then I do take the B supplements as well.
Again, that's the next rung on the ladder. So supplementation is where you can sort of cover those, any nutrient deficiencies. I might as well talk about it now. With supplementation, the best way that we can understand what we're lacking is by doing a blood test, but not, it's not ideal to get a blood test every, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it may be. So, again, it comes down to a bit of experimentation. If you know that because you're not eating protein from meat sources, supplementing with a B12 or a creatine, that makes you feel good, that's a good way of sort of running with it. Okay, is that all good? Answer your questions. Any more on protein, fats? All good? Yeah? Okay. One thing I want to touch on now, before we move on to supplementation and a little bit on hydration as well, is post-session, post-HYROX. We've touched on we haven't done during, but I'll touch on that again in a little bit with supplementation afterwards. Now, when we're training with intensity, be it in a training session or during a HYROX race, it's really important to make sure that we're getting something on as soon as possible. So a rule that I like to try and adopt is 30-30. So within 30 minutes of your session finishing, especially in training, where we've got to go again the next day or the day after, because ultimately what we've got to think about with HYROX training is that we're not just fueling for today, we're fueling for tomorrow. Because what we don't want to do is get to a point where we're under-eating or under-fueling with carbs, because that depletes our glycogen stores, we can't go again the next day. Okay, that impacts our recovery, same with protein. So within 30 minutes, what I want everyone to start thinking about is, let's prioritise our protein intake to initiate that muscle recovery process as soon as possible, and also our carb intake. Now there's been studies recently, I don't need to bore you, but it's shown that for bodybuilders and for more strength-oriented athletes, it's not wholly necessary to eat within what they call the anabolic window. But certainly for endurance performance-oriented athletes, which, you know, this is a HYROX workshop, that's what you're all here for, we want to initiate that recovery process as soon as possible. So within half an hour, you want to prioritise your carb intake and your protein intake. Reducing fats and fibre as much as possible because they slow digestion and they prevent the absorption of those carbs and proteins. Okay? So that might be like a protein shake with a bit of honey in it, and that's what, you know, I've just had there, or rice cakes are a good one for carbs, boiled eggs. I know it's not the nicest thing to bring into the gym, but you know, you get my point. So yeah, and then within, you know, 2 hours, then you go to a more substantial meal. That's especially important again on those more intense sessions. So it's about planning ahead, and that's where again it's so hard to unlink training and nutrition when it comes to things like this. You need to think, okay, today I'm doing a capacity session, I'm going to be working for 45 minutes, I know it's going to be bloody tough, I need to think about what I'm going to do straight after to make sure I kickstart that recovery process. Okay? Again, I'm going to ask you, all's good? Yeah? Cool. Next thing I want to touch on, micronutrients. Again, we've just touched on it here. Next run on the ladder. You've heard it before, it's a bit boring again, but eat the rainbow. Eat as many, you know, greens as possible. Some people like to eat the same things every day, and you know, I'm fine with that. I'm a bit of a creature of habit as well. I eat my kefir bowl in the morning, I'm sure you've seen it. I do like a bowl of kefir, a scoop of whey isolate, some Greek yogurt, but then what I'll do to add variety and eat the rainbow is throw different seeds, different nuts, different fruits, honey or agave syrup, peanut butter, cashew butter, just switching it up every week just to get different profiles of micronutrients, and that's really good for your gut. So just a little bit of gut health, you know, your probiotics and your prebiotics. So your probiotics from things like kefir, fermented foods, are what colonise the gut. So, you know, there's been studies to show that, you know, everything sort of stems from your gut health. So if your gut's in a good place, you're performing better, you're reducing your stress levels, so important. And then getting different, again, profiles of micros from your prebiotics, so those nuts that I talk about, fibrous foods, different veg, different fruit, I mean, the list goes on. That's feeding those probiotics in the gut. So it's creating a really nice, healthy gut environment, and that's where the variety comes in and the micronutrients comes in. So again, for lunch, you might have a staple of, I don't know, chicken and rice, but you might switch the rice one week for quinoa. We touched on carb sources, different veggies. Yeah, you get my point. Okay, so that's micronutrients. Again, any questions, or is that all good? Yeah. Okay. Quick one on hydration. Obviously, it's very, very important. I know I've just handed you out hydration electrolyte sachets there. They are very important. This is getting into supplementation a little bit too. But I tend to think electrolytes are quite overrated in terms of supplementation and hydration. Often, as long as we're drinking enough water and we're getting plenty of sodium, so that might just be a case of seasoning your food, you're tending to cover all bases. But often, especially if you've done an intense sweaty session, as the weather gets hotter and you're sweating more, that's where, you know, an electrolyte sachet can come in handy. But the main thing you want to think about with hydration, just around that point out, is total fluid intake. So you want to be hitting at least, you know, for yourselves, 2 to 2.5, potentially 3 or even 4 litres of water per day. That is relative to body weight and sweat rate, but that can be, you know, getting into the weeds a little bit. And then sodium, just making sure, again, seasoning your food nicely. Again, you can get into the numbers in terms of exact grammages and milligrams, but it's not wholly necessary. At the sort of top level, as you guys progress in HYROX and you start really wanting to dial things in, that's when you can get into the weeds with the numbers and think about how many milligrams of sodium I take in a day, potassium, magnesium. But yeah, as long as you season in your food nicely and you've got plenty of, you know, drink plenty of fluids, that's going to cover your bases. Okay. Last one, supplementation. Now these are the, you know, really the 1%, the final little margins where you can gain a little bit on race day or in training. Again, it's easy to get caught in the weeds, and there's so much information out there about what you should be taking. I've been guilty of it as well, just buying any old shit because I think it's going to work. But yeah, it's not always the case. But for me, everyone should be taking creatine. So who here takes creatine? Is anyone that doesn't? So Bobby might be one that you think about taking, mate.
What is it?
Creatine monohydrate increases, again this is going to sound really technical and boring, but our phosphocreatine in the muscles, which increases our ability to you know, create energy through ATP effectively.
Right, okay. So how does that sort of supplement? Is it a tablet or is it powder? Or?
You can take it in both.
Okay, right.
So the recommendation with that is 3 to 5 grams per day. You can take it in the morning, you can take it in the evening, in a glass of water or as a tablet. Previously, people have spoken about loading phases, so taking slightly more in the first 7 to 14 days, but I don't think that's wholly necessary. But I think that would be, you know, really, really good for you. It can come with a little bit of water retention. I don't know if anyone's noticed that, but I think the benefits outweigh any sort of cons. It's one of the most researched supplements, so that's sort of my number one. Everyone should be taking a creatine supplement.
Why has that only just become a thing then? Well,
it's
you know,
certainly grown in popularity in the last couple of years. It's always been well researched. You know, studies date back
these
to
things just come out of nowhere, though, don't they? They seem to.
I think where it's gained a lot of traction in the last couple of years is because there's now studies coming out that suggest that it might help with cognitive performance,
Menopause.
menopause.
Well, I feel different.
I'm sure Becky
Yeah.
anti-aging. You know, there's even one that I really like. So to be honest, I didn't sleep much last night. I was out for a run club and then I had to work. So this morning I took a slightly higher dose of creatine because it's been shown to help with sleep deprivation. So if you've slept less, you can take a higher dose. 3 to 5 is recommended, as I said to you, Bob, but you might take 10, 15. Again, you've got to train the gut and tolerance, build that up over time. But I think that's why it's gained a lot of popularity recently, because there's more research, not just in endurance performance.
Yeah.
How am I doing for time? Am I waffling on too long, boys?
No, you're right. We're just saying, as soon as you went about sleep deprivation, we need to take some more.
Yeah. Everyone's going to start taking 20 grams of creatine now. I'm in trouble.
Rejecting it.
In that case, I still almost.
Can you do it with the creatine?
I mean, I probably wouldn't take 20 grams per day. Again, assess how you're feeling on that. The safest way to do it is to get blood tests regularly, but we don't have the access to that. But 5 grams will cover your basis.
I think I'll take about 4.
Yeah, 3 to 5 is perfect. If you wanted to experiment with taking a little bit more on, whether it's double training days where you're putting your body under extra stress or you've not slept very well, you might experiment with 8 or 10. But again, building your tolerance, perhaps taking 6 to 7, you get the idea. It's just about weaning yourself onto it, and then experimenting with taking slightly more on certain days. But the important thing is to saturate the muscles, which can take a little while. So don't expect to wake up the next morning and I had Dad do that. I said, Dad, you need to start taking creatine, and he woke up the next day and said, son, he said, he actually told me, I feel worse. I was like, don't look at me. So, creatine is number 1. Next I'm going to talk about is just a quality protein supplement. Now, the reason that I encourage this is just sometimes it can be difficult to hit our protein goals. So we said that 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. For those of us who happy eating meat and we are vegetarians, like a whey supplement is obviously the go-to. If you struggle with a bit of GI distress, a whey isolate or a whey hydrosolate is better, because often the GI distress from a concentrate, a whey protein concentrate, is because of the lactose content. So an isolate reduces the lactose content and also the fat content. Okay? Does that make sense? And then for anyone taking the vegan or vegetarian supplements, you've got your soy, which tends to be great, pea proteins, and some combine different, so soy, pea, whatever it may be, into one sort of protein supplement. Okay? That's protein, so that just helps us hit our protein goal.
Forgive me, forgive the maintenance, but I do do a pre-protein supplement, but I don't do it every day. Is that the wrong approach then? I only do it if I tend to do exercise. If I go for a run or come to class, I want a protein shake.
That works. That works. If that's again, if that's something that you feel like works for you, absolutely. Again, you might experiment and try taking it every day. Yeah, because that just helps you get closer to that 2 grams per kilogram your body weight. Because sometimes it's easy when we're not tracking and leaning into that more subjective approach that we were talking about at the start, to all of a sudden undereat or not hit our protein intake or not hit our carb intake. So again, that's why I mentioned a protein supplement, because it can help us hit those numbers. What else have we got? Omega-3 is one that I tend to recommend. Looking for a nice ratio of EPA to DHA, which are from fish sources, but you can also get EPA and DHA from other marine sources. You've got APA, but that tends to be slightly lower in bioavailability. So for yourselves who are vegetarians or vegans looking for, I think it's like an algae supplement, which is higher in EPA and DHA. So that's something to think about. Again, for anti-inflammatory, for heart health, cognition, all really good for recovery, which is really important for what you guys are doing with HYROX. Want to, reduce inflammation as much as possible, promote that recovery process, and omega-3 can help with that. What I'll do after this as well, I should have mentioned at the start, is I've got loads of sort of guides on all of this supplementation. As Lou said, it will forward it all to you, but I've got all the numbers of exactly how many milligrams you should take a day. Yeah, exactly. That's why it's not ideal for me to just spurt loads of numbers at you without anything to back it up. So I'll send all that through to you. I think for omegas it's 2,000 to 4,000 IUs per day or milligrams per day, but I can send that through to you so you've got it in front of you. Vitamin D is brightening up a little bit, as we're all pleased to see. But when the weather's a little bit more dull, obviously a vitamin D supplement can help, especially here in the UK where it is not very nice all the time. And I think that's it in terms of supplementation. We can again get into the weeds. We think about all sorts of different things like a magnesium supplement to promote sleep. That can help, but it's not wholly essential. I just think as long as you're getting your creatine, if you want to take a protein supplement to help you hit your protein goals, happy days, then a vitamin D and an omega are sort of essentials. They tend to be the most researched. There's no real downside to taking, too much. Obviously, if you're popping vitamin D tablets all day, you're going to be in trouble, but you get my gist. Okay, let me just check my notes there, make sure I've got everything. One last one I will touch on, because I've just recently started taking it again, and I do notice a difference. Again, it varies from person to person, is beta-alanine. Has anyone heard of beta-alanine?
No.
Heard of it.
Yeah,
Pre-workouts and that.
Pre-workout. So beta-alanine is it's a non-essential amino acid, and it's what gives you that, you get that tingly anesthesia sort of feeling when you take a pre-workout supplement. I don't know if anyone's
Oh, nice.
that.
Yes.
And you feel like you get the itches and you
Yeah,
feel
I
like...
got some horrible disease.
Yeah. So it's beta-alanine that causes that sort of itching sensation. It's not very nice. But there's been a lot of nice research coming out recently, specifically around HYROX and endurance sports. So a lot of sort of 1,500 metre athletes take it, like the mile athletes, track athletes take it. Again, the margins are very small. A lot of these supplements will only see like in the data like non-significant results, like 0.5% or 1%, but this is actually close to 2 or 3. So we're not talking big numbers, but it can make a difference over the course of a HYROX race. But beta-alanine, it effectively increases your carnosine levels in the muscles, which helps buffer the build-up of acids. So I mentioned earlier about HYROX being an aerobic race with anaerobic components. So, I'm sure you felt earlier when you was pushing the sleds and you feel that lactate build-up. Beta-alanine can help buffer that sort of build-up, so it reduces it. Yeah. So it can be really helpful for that. Again, with beta-alanine, it requires you to load it for anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks. So you're not going to feel the impact because you need to saturate the muscles in what it helps increase, which is carnosine. So it can take 4 to 6 weeks for you to notice an impact. But it can give you those 2 to 3% increments, which can be really helpful. Certainly for my own performance, I've definitely noticed a difference. And this is one that you might sort of phase in and out of your training. So if you know you're going to peak for a race, I'm obviously training for Worlds at the moment, so I've started taking it sort of 10 weeks out so that I'm ready come race day with the muscles fully saturated and carnosine to help for those little incremental gains. So that's just one last little supplement I wanted to
And is
touch
that
on.
not something that's naturally occurring and something that we should eat?
It's a non-essential amino acid, so the body can't produce it. In fact, we certainly get carnosine from foods, from things like our meats and things like that, but I don't know about beta-alanine. I know that it just increases the carnosine levels in the blood,
And it's a
in the muscles.
tablet or a powder?
Again, you can take it in tablets. The issue with that is that sometimes you have to take sort of 6 tablets and it can be a bit of a pain. But for me, a powder, 3 to 6 grams, they give you a nice handy little scoop, so you can just put it in.
And in the morning then, or just pre-workout?
Again, it can give you that tingling sensation. So what you might think about doing is starting with 3 grams and increasing to 6 across the 4 to 6 weeks. But I would take it before a workout or in the morning, because you don't want to be taking it before bed, because you can get the itches and you'll be in bed all like this and your partner will be thinking what's going on here. So yeah, in the morning or before a workout.
Okay, thank you.
But that is pretty much everything that I wanted to talk on today in terms of the pyramid. So just to recap, we've got our calories at the bottom. That's what I want you all to start thinking about. We want to make sure we're not under-eating or overeating, certainly. So leaning into those 2 different approaches, being more objective, tracking our foods, and subjective. Then we've got our carbohydrate intake. Again, I'll send you all the slides for the specific numbers you want to be hitting. Protein, fats, not going to be an afterthought. We want to be intentional with our fat intake, but we want to be prioritising our carbs and protein, as I mentioned. Micronutrients, eating plenty of different foods, whole foods, lots of variety in our diet as much as possible. Hydration, of course, is important, but not as important as people seem to make out. Electrolyte intake. And then, what was the last thing I spoke about just then? Supplementation. There we go. So, all good. Have we got any questions or anything I've touched on today?
I have a question.
Go for
Sorry,
it.
it's
I'm all ears. No,
also
go for it.
Really interesting. What's your take on fasting?
Again, I was having this conversation with Leon as well. This again comes down to personal preference, and a big thing that we need to think about too is that everyone here's got different schedules, different routines, different training goals. So if it works for you, what I tend to advise with fasting is if we can get 12 hours where we're not eating each day, so a sort of a 12-12, I think, that's something that we should all strive for, but not at the consequence or the sacrifice
You
of
don't
our
buy into the
performance.
benefits of shutting down.
So what the data sort of suggests, now people will say that they feel, lighter, they feel clearer in their fall, and I think that's more sort of anecdotal, because what the research suggests.
Any of that?
What's that, sorry?
Cell repair.
Again,
shut down.
or you're referring to autophagy there, which is where the cells start to effectively clean themselves. What the research suggests is that's more sort of 24 to 48 hour fast as a reset. But where we're going to be competing higher and performing regularly, you need the constant fuel, you need the carb intake, you need the protein intake. So it's not optimal. But if we can aim for like 12 hours per day where we're not eating, it just gives our gut a little reset, gives the digestive system a little breather. Boys were talking about with our training, incorporating rest days. We need to think about the same thing for our gut. So just giving our gut a rest. If we can aim for 12 hours per day, then happy days. Might push that to 14 if you feel good, or 16. But certainly, those longer fasts. What are you sacrificing by
it's not
not
for this,
eating?
is it?
So that's the best answer I've got for that.
No, thank you.
You all good?
I might just touch on
Yeah, go for it.
okay, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely.
For some of the sort of more heavier sessions or the longer sessions, I'll sometimes have pre-workout before. I ideally want to try and move away from that, just because I'm not a fan of it. I don't like the thought of taking it long term.
Yeah.
What would you recommend? Sort of?
Do you know what's in your pre-workout supplement?
Not really.
So obviously, and do you know when you're taking your pre-workout?
I tend to take it. It varies on the product you get, but usually 10 to 15 minutes before the workout.
And in terms of time, are you training in the evening or the morning? I should have touched on caffeine. I've touched on caffeine.
A mixture, evening and mornings. But mainly
So what I'd advise for you, Rowan, is certainly for your evening sessions, I'd stay away from all caffeine, because Lou's spoke about sleep earlier. I'm a nutritionist. I love nutrition and food, you know, I can tell you that it's the most important thing, but it's not recovery, it's sleep. So if we're taking caffeine in the evening session before our workout, and that's impacting our sleep, that's just not optimal. So to answer your question, I'd steer away from any pre-workout supplements, certainly for our evening sessions. For the morning, if you want to move away from a pre-workout, certainly leaning into caffeine beforehand. So what tends to be advised with intense workouts is 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So for me, I'm a 75 kilo athlete, quick maths, oh my god, 225 milligrams of caffeine roughly at the low end, and double that on the top end. So just, that might be a black coffee, which is, you know, a lot better for you than some of these pre-workout supplements. I'd steer away from energy drinks as well, sound right. There is a time and a place for an energy drink. You know, I don't mind a Red Bull before a really intense session in the morning again. But yeah, for you, mate, it might just be a black coffee, or even with a little bit of milk, with those numbers, which again I'll provide for you, and then perhaps some beta alanine as well.
Yeah. I drink coffee black anyway,
Yeah,
so
cool.
I'm just trying to get to have that.
Yeah.
And look at the tablets as well. There's a lot of pre-workout in there.
Yeah, I mean, they tend to just put all sorts of, so the reason that these pre-workout supplements put something like beta alanine in there as well is because it gives you that tingly sensation, and some people quite like that when they're working out, because it gives them a little bit of a buzz. But I already mentioned that you have to load beta alanine, so if you're taking it acutely, just in a pre-workout supplement before you train, it's not actually having any effect, it's just giving you that tingly sensation without upsetting your lactate. Yeah. So
you just have to keep taking that, like as a supplement, like forever.
For 4 to 6 weeks, so you'll notice the benefits after 4 to 6 weeks. Then you might keep taking it 2 weeks before your competition, or you know, a particular time that you're striving for, a goal date, whatever it may be, and then you can sort of come off it again. And then, you know, you pick another date in the diary, 12 weeks down the line, start loading again. I wouldn't recommend taking it all the time. And again, it's one of those, that's why it was sort of bottom of the list for supplements, because there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on it, but certainly from an anecdotal personal experience, it works. Clients have told me it works. There's a lot of data coming out that suggests that it does work. But no, I wouldn't take it all the time. And then just to build on your point, Rowan, with caffeine, try to cut caffeine intake sort of mid-afternoon at the latest, 2-3 o'clock. It has a half-life of 5 to 6 hours, so if you're going to bed at 8, 9, or even 10, yeah, it might still be in your system impacting your sleep, and you might not even realise it, but it's impacting your quality of sleep, which is again impacting your recovery. Okay? Cool. Any more questions?
Can I just say, round of applause for Sam?
Yes.
Yes.
If you guys do have any questions, I'm obviously in that group chat as well, so yeah, feel free to message me if you go away today and think, oh, we should have asked that, or anything like that. Just yeah, drop me a message. I'm always happy to sort of help out, and I'll put all those resources that I mentioned that sort of break down everything that I've spoken about today into the numbers, so that you can take them away and, you know, really look for yourself. And then if you've got